in a place where the wild avoids human doors. Something chose to break that rule on the coldest night of winter. The blizzard had already taken the mountain's voice when a sound at the door asked for help without words. The storm had been building all afternoon, the kind that erased edges and swallowed sound, until the mountains outside the cabin became little more than moving shadows beneath a sky choked with snow. Wind pressed itself against the walls, testing every seam, every window, as if searching for a way in. Inside, the ranger sat alone at the small wooden table, a mug of cooling tea forgotten between his hands, listening to the familiar language of the high country. He knew the voices of storms. He trusted them. What he did not trust was the sound that came next. It was faint at first, almost lost beneath the howl of the wind. A scraping, then a pause. Then again, slow, deliberate, uneven. Not the frantic flutter of a trapped bird or the random strike of flying debris. This had rhythm, intention. The ranger straightened, his senses tightening. In these mountains, animals did not come to doors. They avoided them. He stood, boots creaking softly on the wooden floor, and waited. The sound came again, closer now, unmistakably at the door. He hesitated, hand hovering over the latch as the wind slammed against the cabin. Opening the door meant inviting the storm inside, meant risking whatever stood on the other side. But the sound carried something else with it, something that threaded through the fear. Urgency. He pulled the door open. Cold exploded inward, stealing his breath, snow swirling across the floor. And there, collapsing against the threshold as if the last of her strength had been spent reaching it, was a snow leopard. Her pale coat was darkened with ice and sleet, her powerful body trembling uncontrollably. She did not snarl or bare her teeth. She barely lifted her head. In her jaws, held with impossible care, was a tiny cub, small, limp, its fur stiff with cold. The mother released the cub onto the wooden floor, then lowered herself beside it, her sides heaving. A low sound escaped her chest. Not a warning, not a threat, but something close to surrender. The ranger did not think. Training, instinct, and something deeper moved him forward. He dropped to his knees, scooping the cub into his hands. It was frighteningly light, frighteningly still, with his other arm. He dragged the mother fully inside, muscles straining against her weight, then kicked the door shut as the storm raged on outside, shut out for now. The cabin felt suddenly smaller, the air heavy with breath and frost. The snow leopard lay on her side, eyes half-lidded, chest rising unevenly. The cub's body was cold as stone. The ranger moved quickly, stoking the fire until flames roared and heat crept back into the room. He wrapped the mother in thick blankets, rubbing her limbs with slow, steady pressure, careful to keep his movements calm, predictable. She watched him through glassy eyes, too exhausted to resist. The cub worried him more. It did not cry. Its chest barely moved. He unzipped his jacket and pressed the tiny body against his bare skin, holding it there, letting his warmth do what tools could not. He sat on the floor beside the mother, back against the stove, counting breaths that barely came. Outside, the storm continued its assault, indifferent to fragile life unfolding within the cabin's walls. Time lost its shape. Minutes stretched into hours marked only by the crackle of fire and the sound of breathing, his, hers, and the faintest whisper from the cub. The snow leopard shifted once, lifting her head just enough to see where her baby lay. Her eyes met the ranger's. There was no understanding in them yet, only exhaustion and need. But she did not pull away. She stayed. And in that shared warmth, in that quiet defiance of the storm, the first fragile thread of trust took hold. The fire burned steadily now, its warmth pushing back the cold that had settled deep into the cabin's bones. Outside, the storm still roared, but its violence felt distant, muffled by thick walls and the quiet focus of the man inside. He moved carefully between stove and floor, between blankets and bowls of warming water, keeping his motions slow and predictable. Every sound seemed amplified in the small space. The crack of wood, the soft scrape of cloth, the uneven rhythm of breathing that anchored his attention. The cub lay tucked against his chest, its tiny body beginning to soften, a faint rise and fall returning where there had been almost nothing before. He adjusted his jacket slightly, careful not to disturb it, and felt a fragile surge of relief. The snow leopard mother watched him closely, her head lifted just enough to track his movements. Her golden eyes were no longer glazed, but they were sharp, alert in a way that made him aware of her strength. Even now, she was still a predator, even weakened, and he respected the line that remained between them. He offered her water first, placing the bowl within reach and stepping back. She hesitated, nostrils flaring, testing the air. After a long moment, she lowered her head and drank, slow and cautious, never taking her eyes from him. He stayed still, letting the silence stretch, understanding that this was not a moment to rush. Trust, if it came, would do so on its own terms. Hours passed like this, measured in small changes. The cub stirred once, a soft twitch of movement that tightened his throat. He checked its breathing again, gentler now, less frantic, and allowed himself to sit back against the wall. Fatigue pressed into his shoulders, but he did not sleep. He watched. He waited. Outside, the storm began to lose its sharp edge, the wind settling into something lower, less insistent. The mother shifted her weight, pulling her body closer to the cub's warmth. When he reached for another blanket, her ears flattened, a low sound rumbling in her chest. He froze instantly, hand hovering midair. Slowly, he drew back, offering space instead of insistence. The sound faded. She relaxed again, and he felt something loosen inside his own chest. It was not forgiveness, not trust yet, but understanding. As the night deepened, exhaustion softened the edges of fear. He fed the fire one last time and sat on the floor, legs stretched out, back against the stove. The cub remained tucked close, its small heart steady beneath his palm. He spoke softly once, not words meant to instruct or calm, but the simple sound of a human voice existing in the dark. The snow leopard listened, head tilted slightly, eyes half closed, as if weighing the meaning of it. When pale light finally crept through the frost-laced window, the storm had moved on. The mountains outside stood quiet and reshaped, buried beneath fresh snow. Inside, the cabin felt different, less like a place of emergency and more like a shelter earned. The cub let out a faint, raspy sound, more breath than voice, and the man smiled without meaning to. Hope did not arrive all at once. It settled slowly, carefully, like warmth returning to numb fingers. The snow leopard lay calm now, her breathing steady, her gaze no longer sharp with suspicion. They had survived the night together, not through anything extraordinary, but through patience, restraint, and the shared refusal to let the cold decide the ending. The recovery took time, the kind measured in patience rather than days. Veterinarians arrived once the weather cleared, bringing quiet efficiency and equipment that fell out of place in the small cabin. The mother was sedated gently, treated for frostbite along her paws and ears, while the cub was warmed, fed, and monitored with relentless care. The ranger stayed close but unobtrusive, watching from corners, learning when to step back. Gradually, strength returned to both animals, subtle at first, then undeniable, until the day came when the crates were loaded and the mountains waited again. The release was done without ceremony. High above a tree line, the doors were open and the cold air rushed in, clean and sharp. The cub bounded out first, awkward and fearless, disappearing briefly into the snow before tumbling back into view. The mother followed more slowly, pausing to taste the air. She looked once toward the ranger, not lingering, not afraid, then turned and moved uphill, her cubs scrambling after her. They vanished among rocks and white silence, leaving behind only tracks that the wind soon erased. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm. The ranger returned to his patrols, repairing sensors, marking trails, listening to weather reports that were rarely accurate. He did not speak of the night often. Some experiences felt diminished by explanation, and this was one of them. Still, it stayed with him in quiet ways, in the patience he carried, in the way he watched the land more closely than before, as if expectant to answer back. Winter came again, hard and fast. On a routine check along a high ridge, the ground shifted beneath his boots, a sudden collapse of snow and ice. He slid, struck rock, and came to rest on a narrow ledge, pain flaring through his leg. Night fell quickly, the cold pressing in with familiar determination. He radioed for help, the signal weak and uncertain, then waited, conserving breath, listening to the wilderness move around him. He was not alone for long. Shapes emerged from the darkness, lean bodies moving with purpose, eyes catching the faint light. Wolves circled, drawn by blood and stillness. He gripped a flare, heart steady despite the fear. When one stepped closer, another presence arrived without sound. A pale form dropped onto the snow between him and the pack, powerful and unmistakable. The snow leopard stood there, muscles taut, her cub now nearly grown beside her, both of them fixed on the wolves with cold resolve. The wolves hesitated, then withdrew, melting back into the night. The leopard did not chase them. She turned instead toward the man, sniffed the air, and lay down against him, her warmth pressing into his side. He rested a gloved hand against her fur, feeling life where moments before there had been only cold. They remained like that until rescue lights cut through the dark and hands pulled him toward safety. When the helicopter lifted him away, he looked down once more. The leopards stood together, already fading into the land. The mountains closed around them, as they always did. What had been given had been returned. Nothing more was needed. He felt no urge to follow or to call out. The bond did not belong to him alone, but to the night, the storm, and the shared choice to protect life. As he healed, he carried that understanding quietly, knowing some connections are meant to exist once, deeply, and then return in a while without explanation. It remained a gift, untouched by memory, shaped by silence and snow at last forever.